So we have stock movers this morning. Jenny Horne, host of Next Gen Investing, is with us. So we talk about tech and some good moves we're seeing. We were just saying the Nasdaq's looking up about 2%, but Dan Ives sounding the warning horns, right?
Sounding the warning horns, yes, and definitely still cautiously optimistic, but with a note regarding some of the tech tariff exemptions we got over the weekend. He said without these exceptions that the U.S. tech industry would have been taken back a decade and the AI revolution thesis would have been slowed significantly, which we have been seeing already reflected in so many of these tech names. But the U.S. tech industry, he said, has a loud voice, and despite the initial strong pushback against the exemptions within the White House, the reality of the situation was finally recognized in the Beltway. Big tech firms like Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft are just some of the few, as well as the broader tech industry, he says, can now breathe a huge sigh of relief. And now we're on to the next step, which is these negotiations on the broader China tariff war, which will take a number of months at least. So I think that some of the language he gives is so important, like the fact that we still, he believes, are months away from a real reprieve in some of these negotiations, but also the fact that he says there's still this mass uncertainty, but now, at least with this news we got over the weekend and some clarity from the White House on the tariff impact on tech, I think that he can at least says right now this is a step in the right direction. I very much echo what you and Kevin were both just talking about, that there's still a huge sense of uncertainty in this entire space, but definitely a positive piece of news over the weekend, and seeing, I mean, some of our most important, most volatile and largest stocks today react as such. I mean, Apple's up about 6% here in the pre-market, which for a name like Apple that it saw its worst 5-day stretch in 2 decades, just over the course of the last several trading sessions, I think they're definitely in need of some reprieve and some optimism. I know all of these names had a pretty decent week last week alongside the strength in the Nasdaq, but it didn't feel that way, frankly. It felt very much like there was still this tone of pessimism as we closed out markets last Friday.
And look, I love seeing Apple with an up arrow and up 6%. And to put perspective on it, as you're saying, and what Dan Ives is still worried about, and that they haven't necessarily gotten the all clear on tariffs. I mean, this is sort of a developing story. And year to date, it's still down 20%. Granted, some of these stocks may have been frothy and needed to pull back a bit, but 20% is still a really big move. Any final thoughts here, Jenny?
It's a huge move, and I think that that's why we feel that this choppiness and this type of whipsaw market activity, because Apple is so exposed to the major indices, being that it's in 3 of the 4 major indices. So yeah, it's a huge move, and I know that the argument has been that Apple was as costly on a valuation basis as it has ever been, and now with this repricing, we have seen valuation come down, but I think rightfully so. When you're pricing in valuation as if this name was basically guaranteeing an iPhone 16 super cycle, and we're obviously not really seeing that come to fruition, I think it was about time that we saw a repricing for its valuation for a name that really didn't have a ton of upside catalysts, and that was even prior to the tariff news. So yeah, I very much agree with Dan Ives, and I think that he has even taken on a more cautious tone than we have known from him in recent years, and that even speaks to some of the hesitant nature right now that this market is becoming very much accustomed to.
Yeah, and this upgrade at Keybanc, and I'm still watching the dollar. I mean, that's something that I'm going to talk to a lot of the guests about. I think the dollar story is one that is troubling to many folks. They don't like to see it continuing to fall. The upgrade at Keybanc, good news for Apple too, right?
Yeah, furthering this nice move this morning as Keybanc did upgrade shares to sector weight from underweight. Well, also, I mean, seeing that without a price target, but last Friday's announcement of this exemption of tariffs on smartphones, they said is likely the best case scenario for a name like Apple, which they think right now this makes it unlikely for Keybanc's prior downside call to be achieved, which is a good thing for bulls. They also did say the move takes a lot of this big risk off the table, and also said they do not think Apple is fully out of the woods. However, to say growth expectations remain high as they look into 2025, there is still likely a consumer pullback concern. And nonetheless, they do believe the worst case scenario of this continuing tit for tat escalation is no longer in play. making it difficult to argue for the downside in Apple shares. So they think that as beaten up as this stock has been on this year, that perhaps we've reached a bottom. I think many of us are hoping for that case scenario. And I also think that many of us are hoping for some of this tit for tat type trade negotiation strategy to also be coming to a close here, because it has been volatile. It's definitely made things interesting, yes, but it's also made things feel a bit riskier. And as many of us know, high risk trading environments are fun, yes, but eventually it feels like, okay, we need things to settle down. That's sort of how I'm going into this week, hoping that things are a bit calmer than they were last week, although last week was very, very fun to report and trade on.
I do love that. I'm going to go with no chance. I'm going to go with no chance of that at all, since the VIX is above 30.
I know.
It's just not that kind of environment.
It's
I do think that the president is, I think the president is very highly focused on the market. It is Holy Week, and they'll have a lot of events at the White House, from what I understand, so those could distract him away a bit. But it's a headline market, and I know, Jenny, you and I are ready, as is everybody on our Schwab Network team. Thank you, Jenny Horne. Good to see you.